Hey everyone, Mike here, and I'm joined by a very special guest. Last time we had Jason Conapisos Alvarez, who voiced Shockwave, and now we have another Jason, Jason Scheier, who is the production designer for Transformers One. Jason, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's a real tremendous honor. Big fan of your YouTube channel.
Oh, thank you,
And
thank you.
yeah, great content. Really inspired to share with all the listeners today and hopefully answer all the questions to the best of my ability.
I've seen you comment on a couple of my videos, and I really appreciate the support, and I think that's just really cool of you.
Thank you. No, it's we have such a great community for Transformers. And especially since the release of Transformers One, I've seen just a huge rise again to the groups, and just makes me really excited to see all the fans and people responding to the movie. So thank you for making content regarding our film, and looking forward to sharing some thoughts and ideas that we were thinking of while we were creating the movie.
So, first of all, I just kind of want to get into uh, how did this position come about for you, and basically, what is your overall role as a production designer?
Sure. So prior to Transformers One, Aaron Dem, our producer, had interviewed me before for another project. This was years and years ago. And I think it was just before the pandemic, actually. And the timing just didn't work out. A lot of it was, serendipity and timing and just things aligning, the stars aligning per se. And so Aaron moved on, and was finishing up that project, and that project got shut down. And I had been taken by something else at the time. I was working on Blue Eye Samurai, and finished up on that and started working on Ultraman. And while I was working as a visual development artist on Ultraman, I got a call from Aaron, and he's like, "Hey, I got this cool project that's over at Paramount. You should come over and just take a look." And this was kind of as the pandemic was happening, so the world was sort of still shut down at this point, and nobody was really in an office. But one thing I loved about Aaron was he's like, if you feel comfortable, we could do an in-person meeting, but if not, we can do it over Zoom. And we ended up doing it over Zoom. And the first call I had was with him and Josh Cooley. And I just was blown. I didn't even know it was Josh's project. He didn't give me any details. And I heard it was a Transformers property. I kind of like inside I was kind of screaming because I was so excited because I'm a total Transformers geek, and I go back all the way to the 80s. I was born in 1980, so in 1984 I watched the whole series and watched the film in theaters with my parents.
Oh,
And
wow.
like broke my brain seeing Optimus die within like the first like 15 minutes of the movie. So I was like, no, the guy I
The
was like
childhood
looking up to.
trauma.
Yeah. So I was that kid, that every other kid that's a fan that's 40 plus now. I was that kid, and it was really awesome because Josh and I aligned on everything. Like he had a brother, I have a brother. We used to run home and watch the show as kids, after school, and Saturday morning as well. And that was just so interesting to hear his point of view and his
Mhm.
profile on what inspired him. And so we both aligned on that aspect. And also just G1. We both were in love with G1, and I think a lot of 40-year-olds are, because it was like the epicenter and the foundation for the whole thing, and the way the bedrock in which it's created. And then we also aligned on the visual sense that we like simplicity. We like things to be complicated to tell the story if it needs to be, but if it's overly complicated in panel cuts and designs, like, not that any of the Michael Bay movies are bad, because I love all of them, they they work well with live action,
Mhm.
because live action is complicated, right? It has like breakups and lots of panel cuts and details, and but we wanted to go back to the essence of the simplified faceplates and
Yeah.
the organization of the panel cuts, where the characters felt like they were distilled down, like that's what they were meant to be, but also elevate it into a new territory where it felt like it belonged in 2024, right?
Mhm.
So that was amazing having those conversations. And as a production designer, just to get into that question a little bit, is my job is to create the entire visual style for the movie. So you come in and you have these really early conversations. A lot of times there isn't even a script yet. And our script was very, very early days at that point. It was finished and there were storyboards already starting to happen. And Bobby Rubio had already been brought in, our head of story. But we had to have conversations very early on and like take big bites off of like pieces of the story to make sure that there was visuals to sort of oversee the entire kind of arcs of the stories and the character. So my main thought was, hey Josh, what are your inspirations? What gets you excited about Transformers? How big and epic do you want this universe to be? Is it something where we're only going to be on a small part of Cybertron? Are we going to see Cybertron as a whole? And then another thing is making sure that the characters are designed first so that the world can,
Hmm.
occupy and inspire where the characters live. And that's biomes and ecosystems and technology and architecture. All those things have to be literate, visually literate and intelligent for the viewers to understand that we're not just building this stuff willy-nilly. Like we're really thinking about how things are constructed and designed. And that's one of my main points of being a designer is the if you look at something and the movie's off, you're still thinking about that world. You're still
Yeah.
wondering like what's around the corner behind one of the mountains or inside one of the buildings. And so my job is to make sure that that feels the quality control is high, but also feels tangible and grounded and relatable. And Josh is the exact same way. He comes from Pixar, and Aaron Dem comes from visual effects, our producer, and they both really care about visuals. Like they get jacked as I do about visuals, and that makes me super happy because they're like, "Oh no, no, no! Like this should be this way." And it's a lot easier to work with someone that's passionate about what the visuals should be rather than someone that doesn't have any idea, and then you're sort of inventing all that stuff for them. And I have a lot of praise for Josh because he had answers to everything. So if I had a question, he had the answer. And if he didn't have it, he'd be like, I thought about that. Just give me a beat. I have some references I've been collecting. Let me just get them over to you. And so he would actually send me great reference for line decker and Art Nouveau and Art Deco and just different types of visual reference that was inspiring to him as he was writing script with Barra and the team and all the guys that were doing all the writing. I never got a chance to meet the writers until after. So Josh actually did a lot of the writing. He wasn't obviously credited for it, but he
Oh,
wrote most of
really?
the movie and actually made a lot of adjustments along the way. And he's an amazing writer. Like that's one thing that I was kind of blown away by was in the past, it's usually like a script writer, a
Hmm.
director, and a producer, but Josh is like an all-in-one where he can act, voice act and ad lib a bit, and then sort of design a little bit too because he's a storyboard artist.
Oh,
So
cool.
it's kind of like a renaissance man, and it's a rare thing in our industry. Usually you get one or the other. Anyways, made my job really easy. And then as a director, I got a lot from him and learned so much. And then our producer, Aaron Dem, super genius, man. Like smart, really smart with like the team and making sure we were supported on every single level, getting me the team that I needed, and then having conversations with us very often, sometimes 4 times, 5 times a week. And he would check in and be like, "Hey, what do you need today? Like what does your team need? How do we look at the schedule together and just make this thing bulletproof?" And it was interesting because we had no time. Like I came on and there was another production designer that started before I did, and they couldn't use any of that stuff. They had to archive it.
Oh, wow.
And so they're like, "Hey, Jason, you have to start from scratch. Like, what do you need? Like, what is?" And so I was like, "I need a crazy computer. I need like at least 6 artists that can like get in the trenches with me, and an amazing art director." And that leads me to Gerald de Jesus, who is my art director, who had worked with me on Blue Eye Samurai, and we were like a mind hive, the two of us, where I can see the big picture. Like I can look at like the StarCraft level and start putting my Zergs down and like figuring things out. And then Jerry would come in and look at the troops and be like, "Hey, let's put together these like launch pages for the artists." And he's like, "Hey, Jason, send me whatever reference you have. I'm going to put together a launch page for you for the artists." And then so he would actually put these like really beautiful pages together for me, and then we would meet with the artist, and then I would launch them, and then Jerry would come in and give them all the details. And what I love about Jerry is like he's probably the best finisher I've ever seen. Like the Well of Allsparks, the package he did for that was so beautiful. It was like hand painted every single square inch of that thing. I gave him a few references of things that like monuments that I saw that I really was inspired by. He just took that spitball, did sketches, had all these beautiful drawings, and then he did the full package with the art team, gave that to ILM. We built models for it in the art department. Anyways, everybody in our art team, they were all virtual art department. They could build 3D models, they can draw, they can sketch, they can paint. And we were a small group, but each person almost operated as their own little mini studio. So I can give a set to one artist and be like, hey, go finish that set out, you know? But as my job as a production designer, what I getting back to the long end of the end of the question is I'm doing the first preliminary ideas. So if there's sub-level 50 or the surface or the Hall of Primes, like I'm building the rough model, like a really rough model in 3D and a few sketches and some references, and I give that to my team. I give that to Jerry. Jerry and I launch the artist, and then they take it and they run with it. So
Okay.
everything kind of goes through my mind first, just to make sure it's vetted, because I've had conversations with Josh, and Josh has been like, "Hey, this is what I like. This is what I need," and I'm making sure that that quality control stays all the way to ILM.
Hmm.
And then once ILM starts working on it, I'm having those discussions with ILM to keep the quality control. And it gets better and better and better and better. So in the beginning, it's like a lot of really rough game level geo. And then it goes to like super detailed ZBrush, like, poly sculpting and Unreal like level quality. So it just keeps getting better and better and better. It's incredible to watch that process happen. And I personally get a lot from it. And I love production designing because I could see it all the way through, all the way to marketing on the posters. And I'm like, damn, that like looks way better now. Like it's incredible how much it's evolved. So that's my job in a nutshell, but we can dive in deeper if you need to.
I can just imagine that seeing something like this type of an animated movie going from just basic ideas just to seeing it on the big screen, that must just be such a cool experience to get to see that.
It's really weird. It's kind of it gets really personal sometimes. And a lot of people would say no, it's not a personal thing to do art, but I live and breathe this stuff, man. Like I have, you'll see in my room, like I have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of books. This is just my office, but I have a bookshelf outside that's just full of books, and um, it's you have to breathe it,
Hmm.
osmosify the landscape, right? And I love everything. I love biology and I love geology and physics, and just I'm weird that way where I'm like super absorbed in whatever I'm trying to understand. And it's no difference when we got launched on Transformers, my team and I, we all got the visual language books and we got the Bible thrown at us from Hasbro. And they gave us this PDF, actually multiple PDFs, one that was just on the primes and one was on the lore and like all the movies. And then the other one was sort of like the designs that had happened through the history. And I just sat with that stuff for weekends in the beginning and just like looked at all of it. And I was like, this doesn't work for what we're doing, but this is great. Like, how do we bring that in? And Josh was the same way. He was looking at it as well. And then we would call each other or text each other at night. And I'm like, hey, did you see this thing? We should totally do this. And it was just so interesting to see that process happen organically. And I had taken kind of a break from Transformers. I like wasn't in love with them as much anymore after a few of the live action films until Bumblebee came out.
Hmm.
And I remember seeing the opening sequence of Bumblebee, that first few minutes. And I
Yes.
was like, oh hell yeah, dude. Like let's go, man. Like I want to do something like that. And but put it in a G1 style because it was G1. Let's be fair. It was G1, but it was a little Bay as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, it had a
And
little
I
bit of a
didn't want to
mixture.
go that in that realm either.
Hmm.
I wanted to spark, without a lack of a better term, the imaginations of new fans. And visually, like it's a love letter to the 1980s. If you look at the colors and you look at the way that the design feels on screen, it's simplified. And yes, people were like, oh, when they first saw it, they didn't know how to react to it because they had never seen anything like it. But that's a good thing because as time goes by, they're going to get used to it. They're going to love it and they're going to want to see more. It just, I think our film, in a way, it'll take a little time for people to start to go, oh yeah, I want to see more of that universe of Transformers One, and I'm excited about what the future holds.
So I want to backtrack a little bit to that
Yeah.
that Bible that you were talking about, because I know that within the Transformers fandom, we've heard about some type of like special binder where it's like all the Transformers lore that Hasbro created. Is that what you were talking about?
Yes, it is. And it's like a NDA kind of like if you're working on a project, you can ask for it. And there's even down to the logo designs, or even evergreen versus theatrical, and IDW, and all those elements that were formerly even Marvel that became Hasbro. You can only use the Hasbro stuff, and so we had to do things with colors to sort of harken back to IDW. Like, an example is like Megatron's helmet and his the black helmet. That's a deep cut back to like the Marvel comics, and even the early prototype toy packaging, and the early prototype toys. But that was us because we had Amy Beth Christensen, our lead character designer, that was even geekier than I was about the characters. And that leads me to saying that, like, Hasbro, if we had a question, they were there every step of the way. And they were like, hey, Jason, if you have a question about any of this stuff, just call us or get on a Zoom. I met with them on a weekly basis. So I actually had calls with Hasbro every Wednesday at like 7 a.m. and they were on the East Coast. So I was like, oh, hey, let's, look at this. And I would show them updates from the movie, and they would show me updates from the toys. And then we would run in lockstep through the whole film. And they had a schedule that we needed to hit. That's why the movie release date was like September 20th, was because the toys were coming out. And so we had to make sure that the movie was finished around the same time as the release of the movie, as the toy, sorry.
So I want to talk about the character design a little bit.
Sure.
For like these designs, I'd say that they're not quite G1, but they still kind of have the essence of that, but they're also very new. The designs that we see in the movie, are those designs you hit that right away, or were there a lot of iterations that you kind of ultimately decided to land on what we saw in the movie?
So great question. The earlier designs were way off cue that I saw from the prior production designer. So we couldn't even use any of that stuff. They gave me a fresh start, which was really neat. So Amy and I, and Jonathan Kuo was actually an early hire. He's a amazing concept designer that I worked with in games when I was over at Dice, and he loves Transformers as well. So I hired him on as a freelancer. He ran at the exact same time as Amy did in the beginning and did a blitz of a whole bunch of different characters. And the main ones we wanted to start with, of course, was Orion Pax and D16.
Hmm.
So we did head studies, body studies, jet packs, like transformation cog studies, and even it was amazing. John Cool in the first week had the chest panel opening up to receive the cog, and like how it rotated into the chest and
Uh-huh.
went into the body. Like, he was doing studies like that in 2D. And then because he's super technical, and then Amy was just so good at building 3D models. And actually, a lot of the stuff that you saw was built. She used to be a modeler, so a lot of her work was done in the third dimension. And so we already knew what it was going to look like rotated and saw the volumes. And so
Cool.
working with her, I wanted his my thought, just to kind of backtrack a little bit too,
Mhm.
is to get things into the computer as quick as possible. You want to make sure that if it works as a 2D object, like if it's flat on a screen, it has to rotate and have a certain volume study. And if the volume is correct and it feels right inside the world, you could build the world around it really easily. So we started with Orion. We built a lineup of Orion, B, and Alita. We kept it super simple. It was only the four of them in the beginning. And then once we got those vetted by the studio, this all happened within a month, by the way. We did it fast.
Wow.
And then within, I'd say 2 months, we had the whole lineup in silhouettes. And my philosophy that I pitched to Amy was, you don't have to put any interior detail into them at all. Let's think about them as shapes. And I made a lineup on a Photoshop document with her. And we took each character and we just put them as shapes on a lineup, as if you were looking at them in a lineup in a police station, right? And then you look at all these characters to make sure their scales were feeling correct to one another. There's interrelationships of those
Mhm.
scales. B, obviously smaller, right? But
Yeah.
Orion and D16 were always challenging because I didn't want Orion to ever feel too imposing right away. I wanted him to end up being imposing once he
Hmm.
becomes Optimus Prime, and Josh and I both agreed on that. And then and then the Hasbro of it all, they were always like, "Hey, Megatron's like a football player." That was Lorenzo speaking too. He's like, he needs to be like a football player, big and hulking, even as a minor, because he used to be
Yeah.
in the old comics and old stories. He was a gladiator,
Hmm.
right? So we wanted him to be tough and big and sort of foreboding. And then Alita is sleek and sharp and like very, in a way, kind of militant too, but also like ultra elegant in her design language. So her legs needed to be really unique, like the way that they would fold and interchange into wheels. And oh God, man, Amy's studies of all of those characters were gorgeous. And she understood alt modes. And so I don't know if you know this, but the designs are one to one. They transform from biped into alt mode and they actually transform. So she actually took I have Masterpiece over there. That's why I'm pointing over that way. She took the Masterpiece toys and actually built all of the alt modes off of the toys. So
Really?
yeah, so each move that she made actually transforms in the movie, just like the toy does. So she would actually go through the steps, and some of them were like 10 steps, some of them were 100, depending on the complexity of the character. So she did that. She worked with Evan Whitefield and Chris Voy, our team on the ILM side, and they one to one transformed them and then put them into the computer that way. And they made they keyframed it in Maya, sent it over to the ILM animation department, and then they matched it and just made it look cooler, obviously.
That's
But
really
man, we
neat.
did all that stuff in the art department. There's some studies online from her now on how they did it. And Josh really wanted that. One thing that he said was, we don't want it to look like a bunch of metal parts in a blender when it
Mhm.
transforms on screen. Because if you look at a lot of the base stuff, that's what it is. It's
Yeah.
a camera, and there's a bunch of like weird pieces of metal, and it somehow becomes a volume.
Hmm.
We wanted to see those parts kind of interlock and change and then overlap on top of each other and adjust to the final positions. And I was a big believer in that. I'm a huge fan of mecha. Like I grew up watching like The Last Starfighter and Gundam and Voltron and all those movies and shows. And that stuff to me makes it worth it when you watch it, because it's like, as you know, as a viewer, you believe it. And guess what? You have everything to believe in this film because it's actually transforming. It's a real transformer.
I noticed when they kind of get their transformation ability and they're going down that hill, they fall down the hill.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, come to think of it, you really do get to see like each individual piece like actually form, and then by the time that they are able to transform completely for the for the like slow-mo shot that happens.
Yeah.
It's like, oh yeah, you can see like all these pieces actually fit into the vehicle form, and I think that's really cool.
Yeah, I don't know if you've seen the YOLO Park ones, but
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
these are probably the most like film accurate versions of our characters. And what I love about, like, if you look closely, like you see how the way the carapace is inside,
Hmm.
and all these are overlay armors. Like this is the exterior armor on top of the internal chassis. So we built chassis for all the characters. So Orion has a chassis, obviously, and the rest of the characters do as well. But these chassis can be reutilized for other characters in the movie, whether it be Ironhide or Slipstream or any of the reflectors, or like Starscream is basically a lot of the other characters in a Decepticon railguard. So I one of the things I always pitch is creating a modular system, and it's a bunch of series of interchangeable parts like a Lego kit. And so if they transform on the inside, like we had this internal chassis that could transform, then the exterior chassis pieces come with it. And so they would never have similar transformations. They would be in different. That was the hard part, right? It's cracking that nut where one part can fold back, like the head can fold back into the body or fold forward. Those are the ranges of limitations. Or the arms can come up and tuck into the body and then go in, or like you can rotate the body backwards and then fold over itself. And you'll see that in the movie in the background characters as they're transforming or changing, or in the race. We did a lot of that. And Stephen King, our animation supervisor at ILM, loves Transformers. He's worked on almost all the movies. He's been on 7. And he knew all the characters' names. He actually planted Easter eggs in the race and throughout the film, the Iconians and the detrackers, and figured out ways to integrate them into the environments and then put them in spaces where the fans would know what they're looking at. I didn't get that deep into things personally. Like sometimes I was so heavily focused on making sure the characters read in their environments
Hmm.
and made sure that the world building was so cohesive to the characters that I was like, I finally had to check out from all that stuff. In the beginning, I was very involved in the, obviously character design was 100% supervised by me and Amy and Jerry, of course. And Josh was like, "Hey, let me handle the animation stuff, and then you could dip in to make sure everything reads." So that was cool for me because I can finally get into like the world building super deep. And for me, that's my bread and butter. Like I love just getting crazy into the deep lore of the backgrounds, and I'll tell you some cool stuff that we did in some of the sets if you ask, and I'll dive deeper in that stuff.
I mean, hey, you can go ahead right now. I'm curious.
Yeah, so the beginning of the movie, we color scripted everything. I don't know if you're familiar with color scripting. Do you know what that is?
No.
So when you are working in animation, we actually create here, let me just share some stuff. Can I share a screen?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So this is what we call a color script in animation. And what this does is it shows a visual journey of the film from start to finish. And myself and my art department take a pass at this entire thing. And Jerry and I were the ones that blueprinted this. So Jerry would actually go with me onto Shot Deck. It's a website where you could find screen stills from other movies or from, or we even used our own reference of
Hmm.
shots that we've taken around town or like in spaces that we had to find the type of lighting that we were trying to get in the movie. So we approached it very similarly to live action. I work very closely with Chris Batty, who is our cinematographer, who had great ideas about lighting, but also he gave me that sort of creative space to take full ownership of the visual design of the movie. So, for example, in the beginning, when we first meet Orion Pax, I wanted the environment to feel like Orion Pax's colors. So we
Hmm.
used the blues and cyans and the ultramarines that you see in almost a little bit of red. That pink hue is the red of his color of his chassis
Uh-huh.
and his external panels. And then once we get into the world of Icon and see Icon City, we wanted to make sure that it came alive with these golds and it was decadent, because you're seeing the world for the first time. And we didn't want Icon to feel dystopian and sad. That was one of the things that we talked about very early with Josh is we wanted it to feel really happy. We wanted it to feel like a place you wanted to be and kind of hang out in. And so in all that visual juxtaposition, we pulled some of that color out, some of that saturation, so that Orion Pax pops against the world in the environment. And so he's like a visual statement as he's running through the crowd. And then you realize once you get into the minor sector is not dystopian. It's not Blade Runner, dark and kind of gray
Hmm.
and sad. It's kind of like Tokyo. So you want to go have noodles around the corner or Energon bowl right around the corner. So every single one of these buildings, we color coded them in a specific way that makes you feel like it's inviting, it's pleasant. And we had a rule system that we didn't want to go beyond analogous here. We wanted to do split complementary so that it complemented one side to the other on a visual sense. And so there's a color combination that happens from the blues that weaves its way all the way into the submarine kind of blue color that we get into that emeraldy color that we get to the bottom of the city when we're
Hmm.
inside of the minor sector. And then we have our train, we go into the Energon operation, and we brought that color back. The color of blue is also the color of Primus, and it's also the color of Energon. And so he's always corresponding to even the planet. Orion's colors are always coming back in because we knew ultimately at the end of the movie we needed to make sure he was Optimus Prime. And then we have the interior of the barracks and Darkwing. And the barracks were a lot of fun. We had so many versions of that. I actually built the first model for that, handed it over to my artist Josh Tonninson and Mario Pata, and they packaged it all up for us. But that was like an absolute blast to design. And actually, one of the ideas I pitched was that in their resting docks, where they go to sleep at night and kind of retrieve their energon, I had this idea that that could even be the toy packaging, like they're inside of those sitting against those energon resting docks.
That's
They never
great.
they never did it. I kind of hoped that they would, but it would have been amazing to have resting docks as
It's
like
it's kind of almost like that Toy Story packaging where it's like, okay, you kind of see that in the movie, and then you
right.
see like the Buzz Lightyear toy, but that's kind of actually how they packaged it for stores and stuff. And it's interesting you mentioned the whole like that like locker room area for the miners because
Yeah.
I don't know what it was, but it just really stuck out to me when I was watching the movie and how much I love the design. And I even loved that when Optimus is talking to them toward the end of the movie, and they kind of have there's like the miners that are on the upper rafters, and they're just kind of legs are kind of waving
Yeah,
back and forth at the top. It just felt so real, and I really
thank
just
you.
appreciated that.
Thanks, man. And you know what? That was my pitch. I pitched that to Josh that, in on the Indiana Jones ride, or I'm sorry, the Pirates of the Caribbean ride at Disneyland, how the pirate dangles his legs over the edge of that bridge when you're riding the ride.
Uh-huh. Yeah, yeah.
I was like, I pitched that to Josh, and Josh was like, I freaking love that. It feels like it could be a ride. I can hang out there. And he's a big time Disney Imagineering freak like I am. So we were like, oh, let's get that in there. And also, Josh Cordis and Josh Cooley, they both had this like similar aesthetic for um, miners and Marines, and like the way that they feel inside of a space, how they personalize the spaces with like decals and graffiti, and sort of have a locker kind of their things. And each resting dock had a little locker on it. And at one point, we didn't put it in the movie, but Orion had his own locker, and he was sort of carving things, and he was advanced more than all the other miners in a way. We were trying to make him stand out visually. So we did that. We actually have a lot of like little things that are in the set that you can't see that were designed that never made it into the movie, but they're so amazing. Even Teleran 1 is inside the locker room. He's hidden in the back. The big computer from the
Yeah,
first
yeah, yeah.
show. I have him in there. I designed him and built him in 3D, and we had him
That's
inside that
very
set. It
neat.
was so cool. But anyways, what I was trying to say is, and I won't go too much deeper than this, but I want to show you that the blues keep coming back all the way to the very end. And then when we get to the end of the film and we see Primus, these are some of the lighting keys that I did for the end of the movie with Yun Ling. We played around with this idea that it's like an inverted sun. And so there's like this heat ripple and distortion, almost like when you get to the core of the planet, it's like you're inside of a galaxy, and there's star systems even inside the planet because he's so powerful. He's basically God, Primus.
Hmm.
And so he's pure energy. And so he's giving the opportunity and the ability to our Orion Pax to be Prime. So he awards him with the Matrix of Leadership because he's sacrificed himself for the greater good of Cybertron. And then it's that juxtaposition, right? So Jerry and I keyed these. These are hand painted paintings. And Jerry did this one where he takes the Megatronus cog, puts it inside of his chest, and becomes Megatron. And then I have this one juxtaposing that of the Matrix, and everything is based on spheres. I mean, down to like the detail, like the sun is a sphere. The interior of the Well of Allsparks is a sphere. The Matrix of Leadership, sphere, sphere, sphere. Eyes are spheres. Like all of those things
Hmm.
are repetitive visual motifs that are done purposefully throughout the film. And also, I wanted to say as well that Icon City is squares, rectangles, and very like simplified plinths that are shaped like trapezoids. But when you get to the end of the movie and you get to the Royal Guard outpost, it's all activity, it's all sharp shapes and angles. So you get this feeling of order in the beginning and then chaos at the end. So visually, you're on this like almost story journey through visuals. The audience doesn't know that they're seeing this, but we're putting that in there so they feel it. And I really wanted the audience to feel that weird sort of transition from, hey, this is a good, stable world. And you'll even see it in the Energon operation when he's like, it's unstable, let's get out of here. Like the world starts to break apart and
Yeah.
starts to become angular again. So we have these visual crescendos that happen throughout the film and arcs that are happening to build these characters up and then break them down, build them up, break them down. So there's a lot of emotionality and arcs that are happening throughout the movie in their journey.
So, as a fan, I noticed a lot of references, I guess, to other pieces of Transformers media within the designs, within,
That's right.
the characters and all that. There's a couple that I specifically want to talk about because I kind of want to
Sure.
know the mindset of like, oh, this looks cool. Maybe we can implement this a little bit. The first one is I noticed that Sentinel Prime's sword kind of resembles what it looked like in Dark of the Moon in the third live action film.
It does. Yes. And we did look at that. We looked at all of it, and we did that on purpose because there is a elegance to it and a regal sort of heroic quality to that. And we wanted to make sure that that came through. And when we were in the Hall of Primes, I don't know if you noticed, but it's even in the Hall of Primes, like when he's standing at the center, he's actually carved a statue of himself at the center of the Hall of Primes. And then there's the 13 primes inside. And we wanted to have all 13 primes in there. And so we ILM and Mario designed all of those. And so if you look at in a 360-degree view inside that space, let me pull it up for you. In here, uh, there's all these, every single character has their own sword inside the space,
Hmm.
and they're artistic representations of the primes. So they're stylized, but Sentinel wanted to be the most important one, so he carved himself front and center at the middle of the Hall of Primes. And his, I don't know if you noticed this, but when the big train comes barreling into the Hall of Primes at the end of the movie, it breaks his statue, and he gets crumbled under his own
I
statue.
did not notice that. That's really neat.
So we did stuff like that, and it was amazing the amount of detail and thought that went into this film. It's kind of crazy, man. Like we were looking at like Transformers Prime, we were looking at the video games, War for Cybertron,
Yeah.
especially the way the roads transform. Uh,
Yes, I think I talked about that either in my review or another different video of
oh,
mine,
did
but
you?
I absolutely love that because I'm a huge fan of the War for
Yeah.
Cybertron games, and I
Oh,
picked
me
up on
too.
that immediately. I think
Here, let
when
me
the
pull
first
it up.
clip came out, when it was the race scene, and I when I saw that transformation, I was like, wow, that's just like War for Cybertron. That's so cool. So like the nerd in me just freaked out over that.
We have a artist on our team who's, in my opinion, probably one of the most largest contributors to the world building was Tim Kalick. And Tim Kalick and I go back all the way to college. And he built all the roads and made them transform in the art department. So these are his studies that he did with the holograms that are on them for the race and some of the checkpoints that were inside of the race itself. And if you look closely, all these holograms, the holograms were designed by Mario Pata. These are actually heads-up displays from the 80s show, and they were just
Really?
turned into a more modern version. So we were actually looking at real stuff from the video games and from the movies, and then injecting that stuff into the movie again in our own way. Even looking at the design language of the interior of this tunnel concept, that stuff is all harkening back to Icon City. When you look at the 1986 movie and the shows, like it all has that same design language to it, where it's all these like inverted trapezoids that are flipped in different directions. And all this stuff is modular, it could be resurfaced in different ways and then reused in a certain way to feel like it's uptown or downtown, minor sector or Icon City proper. But we did tons of these studies in the 3D department. This is all done in the art department. All my artists can do 3D. We even came up with this idea where they can ascend or descend, or they can actually widen or close. And so this is the road widening and closing down to show the pinch points and the choke points inside the sets. Hologram studies. So yeah, we did everything from the graphics, the graphic design, and thankfully we had partners like Industrial Light and Magic that could make that stuff look way more insane than what we could do in the art department. A lot of our models, they were really nice. They're ready for production. And a lot of times they only had to do a little bit to make them workable for the movie. But thankfully we had Tim and Josh Condonson that were amazing modelers and 3D visual development artists that could take that stuff and hand it over to ILM so they can just keep making it better and better.
And I know you mentioned Transformers Prime as another piece of reference. Something that I caught on as well was the when Optimus gets his axe at the end, when he waves it around, it kind of has the same like effects that the Star Saber has in Transformers Prime, and I thought that was
Mm,
really neat. And I noticed a lot of stuff with Transformers Prime. I noticed, the Vehicons kind of had like a
that's right.
similar look, and then there was
They're such a great
Arachnid,
design, you know?
and I abs when I remember watching the first trailer and I saw that design, as someone who watched that show in high school and I was a big fan of that show and it was a lot of part of my journey of being into the Transformers fandom, I just freaked out over that. It was kind of in a similar way of like a G1 fan getting to see like Transformers in live action or something like that. It was such a cool experience to see that.
Yeah, I want to, since you're speaking to that, I can show you um, the Vehicons and the primes. I have some studies here. I don't know if they're all here. Yeah, they're here. Okay. Here's a page I put together for Josh Cooley when we were designing the trackers. And so this was the original tracker that Amy Beth Christensen designed. And I took that design and I colored it in different ways. These never made it into the movie, but this is one idea when we got into the jungle was there was a commando tracker,
Hmm.
and then the elite golden tractor is like Sentinel's personal army. So if you see the golden trackers around, it's because Sentinel's close, and they're his sort of like his secret service. And then the death trackers are arachnids trackers. So when you see these little stripes on their arms, that's actually the same exact stripes that Arachnid has that on her
Oh
shoulders.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And then this is a galactic scout tracker, and this is a tracker that's sort of been retrofitted to protect Quintessons. And it was never put into the movie, but it was an idea I pitched to Josh and Cooley. And they're like security drones, right? They can fly around and protect you, and but they also had like kind of minds of their own. They were sentient, so that was fun to play with and design, and very much harkening back to Transformers Prime.
Now, I also noticed something that I wouldn't call it completely unique to this film because I feel like we have seen it in a couple of other pieces of Transformers media. But it's fairly unique is that the plant life on Cybertron. We don't typically see that often. What was kind of the thought process of kind of instead of just making it pure metal, add some of that plant life?
So I pitched this idea. I asked Josh, I said, are we ever going to see flora and fauna on the planet? Because I think that would make it so much more interesting and more inviting and evocative for the viewers to see. And he said, absolutely. I would love to see that when we get closer towards the end of the film. And when we got to the Royal Guard outpost and the Decepticon camp, he wanted it to be at its fever pitch in terms of the amount of variation of jungle and vegetation. So I had this idea that as you embark on the story, I can show you here on the script. So we could put it in visuals. But when we first start, everything's sort of more like Maurice Noble. That was the inspiration behind the surface of the planet, is like the Maurice Noble like classical background paintings,
Mhm.
where it's like these big, sharp, angular shapes that can transform. And as we made our way towards the hide sequence where we're hiding from the Quintesson scout ship, and it's searching for energon here in this sequence and life forms. They hide from it, and then this is where the vegetation goes crazy. You could see there's a little bit of it growing on the top of this rusted old depot, but once they make their way towards the mouth of Unicron, we call it. It's not actually a mouth of Unicron, but that was the code name for it when they come into the cave because it looks like the mouth of Unicron when they come in. And then they
Cave
come
with teeth.
inside. Yeah, the teeth, exactly. And then you go into the tomb and you can see there's this radium sort of like color and vegetation and sort of overlay. Everything here has been impacted. My idea was that these ancient asteroids have crash landed on the thin veil of atmosphere of Cybertron, and they had plant life and seeds of life on them. And so the energon is actually causing them to go crazy. So at the end of the movie, when we get to sort of the third act, I don't know if we have it on here, but it's here in this section. You see these big craters, these big splash craters next to the Royal Guard outpost. That specific splash crater is caused by those big asteroid impacts. And it's almost like a sculpture that's frozen in time. So once that hits the metal, it heats up and then it sort of super cools and it becomes this giant impact crater. And Adam Ely, our visual development artist, built that whole set in 3D. He works at ILM now, but he was in my art department and he's a huge Transformers fan. And he had spoken to me very early about coming on if there was ever a Transformers movie. And I brought him on and he went crazy on the Decepticon camp. And my pitch to the Decepticon camp is that a scout ship, a tracker scout ship for the Quintessons, crashed into the planet next to where all these asteroids had landed. And that's where the Decepticons made their home, inside this throne room. And they made this throne room where Starscream's at. And Josh's pitch was that that throne room should feel like the heart of darkness and where Colonel Kurtz's lair is in Apocalypse Now. And so it should be all torchlit and it's not powered by energon. It's all very organic around there.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of like vines hanging through and it's overgrown. It feels like the jungle is sort of taking over. And it's also that chaos feeling, right, Michael, where you feel like the chaos is coming around you. So we really wanted to make sure that that space felt like a ragtag misfits of like Ronin all kind of banded together to protect against Sentinel and Sentinel's army. So that's what that whole space was about.
And I believe I might have seen you mention on Twitter that Starscream's throne kind of resembled his crown, like that was the design process. Am I right?
That is correct. Yeah. So when I spoke with my artist Adam Ely, I did a drawing with him, just a quick sketch on my, and I took the helmet, the crown from Starscream, and I said, let's make his throne feel like that crown. And Josh hadn't even seen it, and I was like, let's pitch this to him. I think he'll dig it. And we showed it to him, and then he's all like, "No way, that's so awesome that you're actually grabbing that design language and the motif of the crown. It's just kind of pieces of scrap metal that's been welded together and then repurposed into that crown shape." Because he always, in all the old versions, he always wanted to be in command. He always wanted to be the leader of the Decepticons. And so we thought it would be such a fan service to make sure that the environment even felt that way as well. And if you look at the environment, it's all very Geiger, if you think about it, like especially the xenomorph kind of carapaces and like the exoskeletons. That's what we were thinking about for the Quintessons. And they're inside of that because they're like wanting to dominate the Quintessons. So that's something I think we should probably dive into a little bit too, was the biomechanical, bioorganic nature of the mothership and the scout ship
Yes.
and actually the queen as well. And the legs of the queen with the like moving like tendrils is totally a harken back to the judge that was in the
Yeah,
original,
yeah.
Quintesson design with the multiple heads that would spin around and change.
And that ship, it's not in the movie much, but when you see it, it's just this massive thing.
Yeah,
And the design is just it's insane, really. And I feel like if you just zoom in on it, there's so many different, like you have the or it's kind of like made of organic material, the entire ship, right?
so it's inspired by crabs and the exoshells of crabs. I did the original design, so we had early sketches done by Mario Pata, and he's a huge fan of anime, and he found this amazing. I forgot the name of that anime that he was looking at. It was this. There were ships that were basically creatures, and he did this one version where it would transform and open up, and the panels would have fascia inside with eyes, like hundreds of eyes. And I'm like, that's so creepy, and I love it so much. How do we get that in the movie? So I took those ideas, those inspirations, and I built the mothership out of that. And my artist Josh Tonninson built it in 3D based off of my 2D sketches. And then he took it, gave that to Gene Chi and his team over at ILM. And Gene spent like a month modeling that thing. And it's like ZBrushed out like crazy. It's probably like a 50 gigabyte file of just detail. It's so beautifully done. And we looked at blue crabs. I don't know if you've seen blue crabs and red crabs before, but their undershells have this like fiery red to them. And then the top of them are purple. And so we put these like weird gradations on them to make them feel very poisonous. And I don't know if you noticed this, but when they first show up inside the environment, they're actually bringing their own atmosphere with them.
Oh, I
So
did not notice that.
yeah, so these clouds roll in and it's sort of covering the ship. And because they can't breathe on Cybertron, they're actually, their bladders are releasing this like vaporous air that they can re-breathe, and then they can stay sustained for a short period of time on the planet. And so even the Quintesson foot soldiers and the Queen, when she comes down, all those characters are in that atmosphere. It's very soaked in atmosphere so they can breathe on the planet. And then
That's
when they leave,
really
then that
neat.
atmosphere sort of dissipates and kind of goes away. And that was an idea that I pitched to Josh, and he absolutely loved it because I'm a big fan of like Close Encounters of the Third Kind, where ILM actually that did this animation, they used an underwater photography system where it's like inside of a cloud of murkiness when the ship shows up in that scene. And I was like, we got to do that in this film and put it in. And we were going, Chris Batty, our DP, I gave him one painting. It was this big, huge painting. I don't know if I have it here, but this is the script. So I did a painting very similar to this POV where it's arriving, and we even like hid the back wings. It was so bathed out in atmosphere, and we wanted to like literally come to the edge of the screen where you can't even see the top or the bottom of this thing. It just occupies all the visual space. And just think about how terrifying that is. Like a human being compared to a transformer is already insane.
Yeah.
And then these guys make transformers look like little babies. not even like a flea. So we wanted to make sure that they felt imposing, like they can take over the planet if they really wanted to. And so when we get into possibly if we have an opportunity to make a sequel and these guys get to come back, they're going to come back in droves. And we want to make that battle epic as hell. So that would be something that we could play with is, hey, maybe because that ship is a creature, it can turn into one. So those are things that we're already starting to think about if we ever do get blessed to do a sequel is like,
I hope
make these
so.
things creatures. And I love the idea of I pitched combiners to Josh early, and he's like, not yet. We're this movie is about the primes. It's about Orion and D16 and about their arcs. And I love that he humbled me in that sense where you don't want to have every piece of the kitchen sink in the first movie. You want to make sure that the audiences can feel their story first because it's all about them. And that's why it deserves to be there. And then as soon as we set up that story, then we could start bringing in more unique qualities about the world. And then you could set those elements up as well without going too over the top. And then if we do get blessed to do a trilogy, then by the third movie, you can really have all that stuff shine.
Yeah, I'm sure like gosh, if it's something that I was working on and I kind of have all the stuff that I would want to see in there, I'm sure it's such an impatient feeling to be like, oh, we gotta kind of save that. We have more
Yeah.
story to tell. So I really
Yes.
hope that we were able to get a sequel. I'm hoping that maybe with the digital release, it gets a little bit more traction because I know that,
Same.
everyone who's seeing it is like, this is such an amazing movie. And it's
Yeah,
just the problem of people going out to see it, and it's
I
it's
know.
unfortunate that we haven't gotten like a big box office run with this.
No. It'll find its audience, and I'm a firm believer that, and about patience, I'm a very patient person. And same with Josh. Like that's one thing I really admired about him as a leader was, of course he was disappointed that, and I'm not, going to speak for him in any way, but I was disappointed and I voiced that to him. And he was also disappointed and we both aligned on that level. But I love that he said that this is going to be like a cult classic. It's going to be one of those
Yeah.
movies where people are going to like watch it over and over again once it gets home. And we know that it's going to have legs in that sense when it becomes digital. People are going to be like, "Hey, we don't have to go to the theater for this. We can watch it at home now. Let's just buy the special features and the bonus X-ray edition." And they'll watch it or they'll get the Blu-ray or whatever it is and they can watch it over and over again in really high quality and I'm excited about that part and it will find its fans. So that's cool. And
Yeah.
then, maybe because of the amount of following that comes from that, I really feel like it'll start to have a voice and people will want to watch more and more of this and they'll say, "Hey, we need a sequel. Let's go. We'll go to the movie theater this time and we're going to watch it." So I hope that's the case.
I feel like it's hopefully like a similar situation to the Spider-Verse movie. I know the first one didn't
Yeah.
do as well in theaters, but then all of a sudden everyone was like, "Oh, that's really good." And then the sequel did a lot better. So I really hope it goes on that same track.
Likewise. Yeah, I think it will, and we did our job, as
Yeah.
filmmakers and as fans. We really listened to what the fans wanted to see, and we were patient with that as well, and looking at all the material and being respectful of all that material. I think as a designer, I'm the most proud of this film than any other project that I've ever worked on because I was given the support and the respect that I was, indebted to for Josh and Aaron. They gave me that creative space to really cook. And I thought that was interesting to have that chance to really dive deep into a world and Cybertron to me, I would love to spend time there, and explore it. There's so much more to see on the surface. We have concept art for stuff that didn't make it into the movie that I hope if we do get another film, we can use. And even like the barracks, for example, we have a whole arcade area that we completely modeled out and designed, and there's arcade games in there and really unique stuff. And that was all done by Josh Tonninson. It was like amazing art. And we barely even see the tip of the iceberg of all that stuff. There's a little scene where the truth comes out when Sentinel's like, I took his cog, I plucked his cog from his chest, and he's showing that repeated on a loop. You could see a little bit of that set. We used it there, but you can't see the whole amazing stuff that
Yeah,
these guys did.
I do remember seeing the one arcade machine and it gets like destroyed and all the coins kind of
Yeah,
fly out and
that's
stuff. And I
one.
was like,
There was actually a story beat where Orion and D16 were playing a game, and you have the view from like the game cabinet looking out at them, and they're like playing against each other, and it's like a battle for the primes. And I think it was like Megatronus versus who was it? Zeta, and they were fighting against each other in a game. And then he always picked Megatronus D16 because he wanted to be Megatronus. So that was
that's
kind of a
neat.
fun little Easter egg that we did in the game as well.
And speaking of Megatronus, his face being the Decepticon insignia, which I remember back with Revenge of the Fallen, that was
Yes.
kind of experimented with for the Fallen, and it wasn't used. So, did that have any inspiration on using that in this movie, or did you just kind of come up with that, or
I
what was
pitched that
behind
to
that?
Josh, and Josh loved it because we were trying to find a way to use the Decepticon logo. And I was like, hey, let's put it on the entrance to the Decepticon camp. And Josh was like, no, I don't want to do that. Like we had it feel like it, like it had the same exact orientation as the Decepticon logo at the Royal Guard outpost. And I was like, where could we use it? And I thought about Megatronus. I said, how cool would it be if his armor was actually the Decepticon logo? Because becomes Megatron. So why not have it be visually the exact same logo from his face? And so Amy, of course, being the total team Decepticon like me, as I am, she created the faceplate and we ran with it. And all the little gold trimming that was added in, that was something I really pushed for. I don't know if you noticed this, but like all the primes, they all have a golden sort of armor motif on them because they're elite and they have this like royal quality to them. And so we used gold a lot in the film. It's the color of the primes and the color of the matrix of leadership too. So if you look at the matrix of leadership in our film, it doesn't have the gray handles. It actually has a golden handle. And that was actually something that was pitched by, you could see back there, that matrix of leadership back there has the gray handles, right? The G1
Mhm.
version, but our version is the golden one. And the idea is that over time, because it's been held by so many people over time, it's worn off the gold and it becomes gray later on. That was a thought I had in my head as we were designing it. And Lorenzo di Bonaventura came up with that idea to go all golden with it on the Matrix. I was like, that's awesome, man. I think we should totally put that in. And honestly, like I was really inspired by Lorenzo. We would come into meetings and he really fought for us. And we were in some meetings where we had the wildest ideas, and he's like, "That's great. I haven't seen that before in a Transformers film, and we need to tell that part of the story." And so having Lorenzo in our corner, even Zev Foreman, who was from the Hasbro side, he really cared a lot about the way the movie looked, and they were genius. All those guys that are part of the production team were all very much geniuses. They understood what the fans understood, and they really cared a lot about that. And I thought that it was a great relationship and collaboration with them. In ILM as well, man. ILM, the best in the business, man. All the artists that work at ILM, they literally poured their hearts and their souls into this film, and I hope that everybody feels that on screen.
So I want to bounce back a little bit to what you said about the gold. Um,
Yeah.
so did that kind of translate into why Sentinel Prime had gold on him, even though he wasn't really a Prime? Was that something that he added, or was he kind of like that originally? What was the backstory on that?
He basically thought he was the ultimate prime. And it was a way to actually deceive the audience a little bit too, because we didn't want the audience to know he was the bad guy. So we did our best to make him feel as elite and royal as possible. So when he first flies down from the top of the Icon Tower, that whole tower is golden. It's all bronzes, umbers, golds, and the world around him is actually all that way. The Hall of Primes is just basically a visual metaphor and a representation for what he feels he is in his own head. And he's trying to make himself part of visual history of the primes. And so we wanted to make sure that was in his colors. And also the colors of blue, because he has blue and gold in his motif. We wanted that to feel like he was almost like connected in a way to Orion and to the Energon color. But it was a mislead for the audience because you're like, oh, he's totally just literally a charlatan and he's built on lies. And so we wanted to make sure that the audience felt that when he transforms and goes into his alt mode and then becomes like the super version of Sentinel when he has all the blasters on his legs and his shoulders and cannons, and he covers his face up, he's not who he is. He's been hiding inside of that fake design the whole time. He's pretty dangerous.
So, looking at the movie as a whole and your entire time working on it, is there something that specifically stands out where you're especially proud of, where you look at it in the finished product and you're like, I'm so glad it turned out this way?
Oh yeah. At the end of the movie for me, the last like 20 minutes of the film where Orion Pax gets killed by D16 and then the music literally goes away and then he like falls into the well. From that moment on, that was it kind of in my head from the very beginning. Like Josh talked about that and he always knew that that was going to be in the movie. So we almost built the movie in reverse. We had the ending first and we're like, how do we get there to that last part? And so I'm the most proud of that because we had as much time to think about that moment as we possibly could because it was from the very beginning. And so the fall into the planet, and when the planet is actually opening up for Orion and transforming to receive him in, and then the visual sort of concept of the overlap in time of him becoming Megatron and him becoming Optimus, and when he lands on that surface after he's shot out like Superman, if you notice, like, and I love that Josh says this, Megatron almost falls out of the movie when he blasts through the top of the well, and you just hear this like literally like sharp noise, dee, that part of the movie always makes me want to like cry, dude, because that's the part of the movie I've always wanted to see from any Transformers property is that moment when they become who they are. And I get emotional every time I watch it. Like
Same.
I've watched the movie hundreds of times, hundreds. And every single time I watch it, I'm like, I'm so proud of that scene. That's amazing. And I just hope that fans feel that too, that they like want to jump out of their seats in the theaters or at home whenever they're watching it. When he lands and having that like beam of light coming out of the matrix and you see his silhouette and all that dust rising around him, I just want everybody to feel that joy that I did when I painted that. That was my key. And it's just like wild to me that that's in the movie and it made it all the way through to the very end.
I remember the first time I saw the movie, and it was an early screening back in August, and
Wow.
packed theater, and when that scene happened, where it was like Arise, Optimus Prime, the crowd just cheered like it was an Avengers movie. It was so great, and just getting that essence of
Yeah.
this is now Megatron, this is now Optimus Prime was just such a surreal moment.
Yeah. It I'm so happy you said that because I was worried that it wasn't going to make people excited. But when I actually went to my first screening weeks later for it was an ASIFA sort of consideration screening at the studio, and a lot of the people were people in our industry that do animation movies, and a lot of them are fans of Transformers, and they were sitting down. I was in the back with Lorenzo, with Josh, and with Aaron and my wife. And we're sitting there watching it, and then that scene happened. And we made sure we came back to the theater right when that was about to happen and everybody was like cheering, 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 cheering. And I was like, okay, yes, we did our job. And I was so excited at that moment. I think that's when I'm the most proud about the film. And I'm just really excited that you enjoyed it too as well.
Yeah, then the music too when it came in because Brian Tyler worked on Transformers Prime as well, and he kind of sprinkled in a
Yeah.
little bit of that Transformers
Oh
Prime
yeah.
theme in there. It hit the childhood for me.
That makes me so happy. I actually pitched Brian Tyler to be our composer for our film.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so Josh was looking for composers and he had worked with other composers in the past on like Toy Story 4 and it wasn't I don't think Brian Tyler was even on his radar. And actually it's super funny because I forgot that he did the soundtrack for Prime. I was just like I love that soundtrack. I don't know that who that is. But what I remembered Brian Tyler for was from Children of Dune. It was this TV series that was like for the Sci-Fi Channel. And I was like, "Oh my God, I love that show. I love that soundtrack. Let's see if we can get him." And Josh is like, sure, I'll speak to you in a few weeks and see if we can pitch it to him. And he was on board from jump. As soon as Josh said, hey, can we have you on the movie? he's like, absolutely, I would love to do this. And to Brian Tyler, this was kind of like his Star Wars. That's what he said to Josh. He's like, I want to do this. This is kind of my Star Wars, and I want to do this soundtrack. I've already lived in this world before with Prime, and I went back and listened to the Prime. I was like, of course that's you, Brian Tyler. You do everything that's cool. And he is a genius. He was so kind to me because I told him how we pitched him to become part of the show. And he's also a visual designer. I don't know if you know this, but he does 3D.
Oh, I didn't know that.
He does
No.
visual effects, and he has a show that he's building right now for the MSG Sphere in Vegas. And it's like this insane spectacle that he's doing all by himself with like a small team. And he composed all the music for it, scored it all himself. Like you should see. I mean, watching him work was like watching a mad scientist work because he just knew in his head everything as he was composing, and everybody was just like, "Yeah, yeah, that's what we're doing." And I was there at the Eastwood scoring stage at Warner Brothers when they were scoring the movie live, and that was for me that was the most amazing moment of the movie was watching our visuals being played and watching a live orchestra play to the visuals on the screen. It was we were all crying, man. It was like a tear. It was a very like tear you up kind of moment. It was very beautiful. And if you ever get a chance to watch like a score being made, it breaks your brain. It's completely insane. And of course, Brian Tyler doing Transformers was next level.
Gosh, I know it's just crazy how the music can really transform the scene. I was able to see Hans Zimmer live in concert
Oh,
about a
nice.
month ago,
Oh,
and
you
it
went to that. We missed it.
oh yeah, I was in the one at the Hard Rock in Hollywood, Florida,
Oh,
and
cool.
I felt so lucky too because I think the next week he ended up getting sick and had to cancel a concert. So I was like, oh, I
Oh
would have been
no.
devastated. So I feel so bad for the people who weren't able to go to that one, but just seeing that live in concert, and I know I think he's had a little bit of a touch on the original, I think first few Transformers movies with Steve Jablonsky as well,
Right.
and that was really cool to see. But yeah, with Brian Tyler working on this movie, I mean, so thank you for suggesting that because that
Oh
really,
yeah.
I think,
I mean it was
elevated
a
the movie
match made
so
in heaven.
much. Oh yeah.
Oh, cool. Cool.
It was super great to see, and I think just I find that so interesting that you said that you started kind of with that ending scene and kind of had to build up to that because I feel like you really truly did accomplish your mission of earning that. And I know when I saw it for the first time, I teared up a little bit. It was really great to see as a fan. So I just thank you so much for, putting all that hard work into it. Now,
Thanks, Michael.
is so looking back, uh the kind of main experience of this is over as we're heading to digital. Uh do you have any like special memories of working on this movie that you're gonna take with you into the future?
Yeah, I honestly, every single minute of this movie was a joy to me. Getting a chance to work with my team, um, my whole art department, honestly, they're family, and all of them put their hearts and souls into this film. And so Yun Ling and Mario Pata and Gerald Jesus, my art director, and Kenny Vo, and all these artists, they're Adam Ely, all of them put this creativity and prowess into their work, and they exceeded my expectations every day. And Brian Jimenez was an artist that I mentored when I was teaching at a school called Brainstorm School, concept art, and he actually changed his career path. He was doing something else that wasn't even related to art, and was like, "Hey, I want to be an artist." And I trained him, and he was one of the first hires I brought in on the art department. And he was only supposed to stay for a few months, and he ended up staying for like well over a year because he was doing everything. He was doing lighting keys and props and set design. And I'm just so proud of them. Honestly, it's like, and I would do it over and over again. I would hire the same people back. And of course, I like to give people shots too and give, new people a try. So anybody that's a concept designer, I would like to say this out loud is if they want to work with me, like show me your work. I'll give you consideration, and I'm in a position to hire whenever I'm brought on as a production designer. So I like to give people opportunities, and that makes me very excited. and gives me a lot of joy to see people do the best work that they possibly can, if that makes sense. I think
Mhm. Yeah.
that's to me, I get a lot from giving, and I'm a giver, like I like to share, and getting a chance to share this, it humbled me seeing how much people love that part of it too. And Gerald, my art director, is the same way. He's very empathetic. So we always like think about, we're very considerate of what's going on in people's lives and making sure that they're supported through tough and good times. And I think that that shows in the work. So when you feel the joy on screen, it's because everybody on the whole team was having a good time. And I just hope you feel that and it resonates with you and the other audiences that watch it.
And it really does. And again, just such an incredible movie. I hope it goes up for Oscar consideration. I think it
Me
deserves
too.
it.
Yeah,
Uh,
it does.
Everyone who worked on this movie just did such a great job. I could really tell about all the care and consideration that was put into it throughout the entire production. So thank you again.
Thank you.
And Jason, it's been such a pleasure talking to you. It's
Likewise.
been a great conversation, and I hope everyone watching has enjoyed. By the time this goes out, Transformers 1 will be available on digital. So,
Sick.
everyone, please make sure to go check it out. If you haven't seen it, if you want to see it
Yeah.
again, please check it out. And I'm sure it'll be on Blu-ray soon as well. So, very much a movie worth seeing. And so, Jason, thanks again for joining.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Make
And
sure you put it on loop when it's out on streaming so people can see how many times you watched it.
yeah.
Yeah, man.
I've already seen it 4 times now, and I'm gonna see it
Sick.
just like consistently, like every other day or so. It's just
I
such a
love
great
that.
movie.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Michael, and I appreciate your time. And until all are one.
Till all are one.